Made you something special, dear, Trevor said, his voice a slick, overly cheerful tone he'd been using lately. He set the steaming mug down on the granite countertop in front of me, a wide, practiced smile plastered on his face. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a mask he'd been wearing for months, and it sent a familiar shiver down my spine. The smell hit me immediately, acrid and unwelcome. It was bitter, almost metallic, a sharp, chemical tang that curled my nose. It was nothing like the fragrant, earthy herbal teas I drank every morning. This was an intruder in my kitchen, an olfactory alarm bell screaming that something was deeply wrong. "You're so kind," I replied, forcing a smile of my own, a fragile thing that felt like it might shatter. My stomach churned with a nauseating cocktail of fear and adrenaline. I kept my expression placid, a skill I had perfected over the last few months. Inside, my mind was racing, connecting dots I had desperately tried to ignore. My name is Dana Wilkes. I'm 43 years old, and until recently, I thought I had a good life. For 8 years, I'd been married to Trevor. We lived in a modest but comfortable 2-story house in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. My life was ordered, predictable, and I liked it that way. As a quality control manager for Sundale Financial, my entire career was built on meticulous attention to detail, on identifying discrepancies and ensuring everything was exactly as it should be. It was a job that suited my personality perfectly. I found comfort in logic, in facts, in evidence. For the past 3 months, however, my well-ordered life had been turned upside down. The chaos had a name: Kenny. He was Trevor's younger brother, a 35-year-old man-child who drifted through life on a cloud of irresponsibility and entitlement. He'd moved into our spare room after his latest girlfriend, tired of his freeloading ways, had finally kicked him out. Trevor, ever the loyal older brother, had welcomed him with open arms, conveniently ignoring my deep misgivings. From the moment he arrived, Kenny had been a disruptive force. He slouched around the house in nothing but basketball shorts, leaving a trail of dirty dishes, empty beer cans, and a faint, sour smell in his wake. His usual smirk was a permanent fixture, a silent mockery of the quiet, clean home I had worked so hard to maintain. At 35, he acted like he was still in college, treating our house like a frat house and me like the uptight den mother. He never missed an opportunity to make a snide comment about my boring job or my uptight personality, his words always laced with a condescending amusement that made my skin crawl. As I stared at the suspicious tea, my mind a whirlwind of unease, Kenny slouched into the kitchen, his bare feet slapping against the tiles. "Morning, Dana," he drawled, grabbing a mug from the cabinet with a proprietary air. He glanced at my cup, his lip curling into that familiar smirk. "Still drinking that fancy health crap, I see." I ignored him, my focus entirely on Trevor, who was moving with a strange, hurried energy. Trevor quickly poured Kenny a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter, the regular, unadulterated coffee he drank every morning. But then, in a move that felt both rehearsed and panicked, he turned back to the teapot he'd used for my special brew. "Actually, I made this blend special for Dana," Trevor said, his voice tight. He pointedly avoided my gaze, his eyes darting around the kitchen as if looking for an escape. "It's, supposed to help with stress." The way he emphasized the word stress made my skin crawl. It was true, I'd been dealing with increasing anxiety lately, a constant low-grade panic that had settled in my chest. But the source of my stress was standing right here in my kitchen, Kenny's constant, invasive presence and Trevor's growing, inexplicable distance from me. This tea, with its harsh, chemical odor, smelled nothing like any stress relief remedy I'd ever encountered. It smelled like danger. Kenny plopped down at the kitchen island next to me, his usual spot for holding court and making commentary about everything I did. He took a loud slurp of his coffee, watching me. "Stress, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Maybe if you loosened up a little, you wouldn't need magic potions." I bit my tongue, a habit I'd been forced to learn. Fighting with Kenny was pointless. It only made Trevor defensive of his layabout brother, and I was tired of being painted as the villain in my own home. As Trevor turned to put the teapot back on the stove, his back to us, I made a split-second decision. It was a choice born of weeks of suspicion and a primal instinct for survival. With practiced stealth, my movements fluid and quiet from years of handling delicate financial documents, I acted. My hand shot out, sliding my mug closer to Kenny's spot while simultaneously pulling his coffee cup toward mine. The switch was seamless, a sleight of hand executed in the barest fraction of a second. "Oops, mix them up," I said sweetly, my voice a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of my heart. I pushed the suspicious, steaming mug, the one intended for me, directly in front of Kenny. He shrugged, oblivious. Whatever. He picked up the mug and took a long, noisy gulp, treating the hot liquid as if it were a can of soda. "Tastes weird," he muttered, but he continued to drink, draining half the cup in a few swallows. I watched him, my breath held tight in my chest. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Trevor turn back around. I watched his shoulders tense, his eyes widening in horror as he saw Kenny holding the cup that had been meant for me. The tension in the kitchen became a palpable, living thing, thick and suffocating. I raised Kenny's original cup to my lips, the one containing plain black coffee, and took a slow, deliberate sip. It tasted normal, safe. I kept my eyes locked on Trevor, who was now glancing frantically between Kenny and me, his jaw clenched in a way I recognized as barely controlled panic. Our marriage hadn't always been this strained. When we first met at a company mixer over 8 years ago, Trevor was charming, ambitious, and full of life. He worked as an accountant at a rival firm, Driftline Construction, and he seemed genuinely fascinated by my career and my ambitions. He'd listened intently to my stories about catching financial discrepancies at work, praising my attention to detail and my analytical mind. Back then, he called those qualities amazing rather than obsessive. He had made me feel seen, appreciated, and loved. Things began changing about a year ago when Trevor lost his job due to company downsizing. The blow to his ego was immense. His confidence crumbled, and he started drinking more, spending his days on the couch wallowing in self-pity while I worked extra hours to cover our mortgage and mounting bills. The charming, ambitious man I had married was replaced by a sullen, resentful stranger. Then, 3 months ago, Kenny showed up claiming he needed just a few weeks to get back on his feet. Despite my protests, Trevor had welcomed him. Kenny had always resented me, probably because I refused to tolerate his juvenile behavior the way everyone else in Trevor's family did. At family gatherings, he'd make crude jokes about me having a stick up my ass and accuse me of changing his brother for the worse. Trevor would just laugh along, a hollow, unsettling sound that left me feeling humiliated and utterly alone. Lately, Kenny's comments had taken on a darker edge. He'd started making references to how much better off Trevor would be without me, how I was holding him back from his true potential. My blood ran cold, but I tried to dismiss it as the bitter rambling of a jealous loser. The real turning point came last week. I'd been working from my home office when I overheard Trevor on the phone in the hallway. He was speaking in a low, conspiratorial whisper, but I have excellent hearing. I heard him talking about my life insurance policy, about how a decent payout would solve all his problems, about how he deserved to start fresh. A chill so profound it felt like ice water in my veins washed over me. That conversation had prompted me to start being more careful. I bought a small, discreet digital recorder and began leaving it on in my purse whenever I was home. I installed a baby monitor app on an old phone, placing it in the living room so I could listen in on their late-night talks, the ones they thought I couldn't hear from upstairs. What I heard terrified me. It started with the discovery that Trevor had, without my knowledge, significantly increased my life insurance policy. Then came the recorded conversations. I listened, my heart the block of ice, as they discussed how my death would free Trevor from our miserable marriage and his financial woes. The most damning recording was from just 3 days ago. I heard Kenny joke about how accidents happen all the time, and Trevor responded that he just needed the right opportunity. They had laughed about it, as if planning my murder was some kind of twisted bonding activity. That was when I knew I couldn't just leave. They wouldn't let me. I had to protect myself. I had to fight back. My mind, the analytical, detail-oriented mind that Trevor once admired and now scorned, went into overdrive. I consulted my old friend Jessica, who worked as a paralegal. Without revealing the full extent of the horror, I asked hypothetical questions about suspicious behavior, evidence collection, and the legal ramifications of domestic abuse. I started documenting everything, printing emails, photographing strange substances I found in the trash, and meticulously cataloging the audio recordings. I was building a case, piece by painstaking piece. Now, watching Kenny finish the poison tea, I knew my chance had come, albeit in a way I could never have predicted. "You know," Kenny said, setting down his mug with a grimace and wiping his mouth, "this stuff really does taste awful. You sure you know what you're doing with these tea experiments, Trevor?" Trevor's face had gone pale, a sickly, clammy white. It's an acquired taste," he stammered, unable to look at either of us. "Maybe you should drink some water." "I'm fine." Kenny waved him off, though a sheen of sweat was already beading on his forehead. "Takes more than some bitter tea to knock me down." 20 minutes passed in agonizing silence. 20 minutes since Kenny had finished the suspicious tea. Suddenly, he doubled over with a pained grunt. "Oh, God," Kenny gasped, clutching his stomach as his face contorted in agony. "Something's really wrong." He stumbled away from the kitchen island, lurching toward the living room couch, his face turning an alarming shade of green. Trevor rushed after him, his panic no longer concealed. It was raw, naked terror. "What's happening to him?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated to sound innocent and concerned, though I suspected I already knew. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady. I pretended to consider calling for help, my thumb hovering over the 911 icon, while I actually started the voice recording app I'd kept on my home screen. "I don't know," Trevor stammered, kneeling beside his groaning brother. "Maybe he ate something bad." "Kenny, what did you have for dinner last night?" Kenny could barely speak through the waves of nausea that were racking his body. Nothing different. He managed to get out before another spasm seized him. "Trevor, what was in that tea?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Trevor's eyes darted to me, then back to his writhing brother. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was trapped. "Trevor," I said calmly, never breaking eye contact with my husband, "what exactly was in that tea you made for me?" His face went completely white. In that moment, I saw the truth written across his features: guilt, fear, and the dawning, horrifying realization that his plan had gone horribly, catastrophically wrong. Kenny started shaking uncontrollably, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged. "Call ambulance," he managed to whisper. I dialed 911. "My brother-in-law is experiencing severe stomach pain and nausea after drinking some tea," I told the dispatcher, my voice clear and calm. "He's sweating profusely and seems to be having difficulty breathing." I kept the phone positioned to catch every panicked word, every desperate gasp in the room. While we waited for the paramedics, I carefully moved to the kitchen. Under the pretense of getting a wet cloth, I used a clean plastic bag from the drawer to preserve what remained of the original teapot and the mug Kenny had drunk from. Years of quality control work had taught me the importance of evidence preservation. "Dana, what are you doing?" Trevor asked, his voice cracking. "Making sure the doctors have everything they need to help Kenny," I replied evenly. "They'll want to know exactly what he consumed." The ambulance arrived within minutes, followed closely by a police car. Standard procedure for potential poisoning cases, the officer, Martinez, explained as the paramedics worked on Kenny, loading him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled Kenny out, I approached the responding officer. "Officer Martinez," I said, reading his name tag. I think you should know that my husband prepared this tea specifically for me. But my brother-in-law drank it by mistake. Trevor's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with horror at my words. Ma'am, we'll need to take statements from both of you, the officer replied, already reaching for his notepad. At the hospital, I sat in the sterile waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Kenny. Trevor paced nearby, his hands shaking as he repeatedly checked his phone. The police had taken our initial statements, but I knew they'd be back with more questions once they determined what had poisoned Kenny. A doctor finally approached us. Mrs. Wilkes? I'm Dr. Henderson. Your brother-in-law is stable for now, but we found concerning levels of antifreeze compounds in his blood. Trevor dropped into a chair as if his legs had given out. Antifreeze? I repeated, feigning shock. How could that be possible? Dr. Henderson's expression was serious. This appears to be intentional poisoning. The police will need to investigate your home and any beverages consumed this morning. Trevor remained silent, staring at the floor, his face a sickly gray color. I reached over and squeezed his hand, playing the concerned wife perfectly. Honey, you look terrible. This must be such a shock. What Trevor didn't know was that I'd been documenting his and Kenny's suspicious behavior for weeks. Hidden in my home office was a small safe containing printed emails, photographs, and the damning recorded conversations that painted a very different picture of my loving husband. It had started a month ago when I'd accidentally opened a piece of mail addressed to Trevor, a confirmation for a life insurance policy increase on me. When I asked him about it, he claimed it was just being responsible and planning for the future. But the timing, combined with Kenny's increasingly hostile comments about my holding Trevor back, had made me suspicious. I'd begun paying closer attention to their conversations, especially the late-night talks they thought I couldn't hear from upstairs. Using a baby monitor app on my phone, I'd recorded several disturbing exchanges where they discussed how my death would solve Trevor's financial problems and free him from our miserable marriage. They'd laughed about it, planning my murder as if it were a game. At the police station, I sat across from Detective Cross in a small, bare interview room, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I need to be completely honest with you, I began, my voice trembling just enough to suggest emotional distress. I've been worried about my safety for weeks now. Detective Cross leaned forward, her attention fully focused. My husband has been acting strangely since he lost his job, and his brother, Kenny, has been living with us, making these awful comments about how I'm ruining Trevor's life. Last week, I overheard them talking about my life insurance policy. I paused, letting the information sink in before continuing. I was scared, so I started recording some of their conversations. I know it sounds paranoid, but after this morning, I think my instincts were right. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from 3 days ago. Kenny's voice filled the room. Accidents happen all the time, you know. People drink the wrong things, slip and fall, all kinds of unfortunate events. Trevor's response was even more damning. I just need the right opportunity. Something that looks natural. Detective Cross's expression grew increasingly serious. There's more, I said quietly, producing a key from my purse. I've been keeping copies of emails and documents in a safe at home. I was planning to talk to a lawyer next week, but after what happened to Kenny. The detective's eyes widened as I explained about the life insurance policy increase, the suspicious online purchases on Trevor's credit card, and the pattern of escalating verbal abuse that had made me fear for my safety. Why didn't you come to us sooner? She asked gently. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me, I admitted. Kenny can be very charming when he wants to be, and Trevor had everyone convinced that I was just being paranoid because of work stress. I thought I needed more evidence before I could prove what they were planning. Detective Cross studied me carefully. Mrs. Wilkes, you realize that if your husband intended to poison you and your brother-in-law drank it instead, that's attempted murder. I understand, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just can't believe the man I married could actually try to kill me. But the evidence speaks for itself. What the detective didn't need to know was how carefully I'd orchestrated this entire scenario. How I deliberately mentioned Trevor's specialty routine to Kenny the night before, knowing his competitive nature would make him want to try whatever was too good for him. How I'd practiced switching the cups until I could do it seamlessly. Sometimes, the best revenge was simply letting someone's own evil plans destroy them. The trial was a media sensation. The prosecution presented my evidence methodically, the recordings that proved premeditation, the digital trail showing Trevor's research into poisons, and the documentation of his previous attempts to slowly poison me with sleep medication. His defense attorney tried to paint me as a manipulative, controlling wife who had driven him to desperation, but the evidence spoke louder than any character assassination. What truly devastated Trevor, though, was learning how long I'd been aware of his plans. During my testimony, I calmly explained how I'd suspected something was wrong weeks before the antifreeze incident. I described installing the baby monitor app, setting up the hidden recorder, and carefully documenting his every move. "You see, Your Honor," I'd said, looking directly at Trevor across the courtroom, his face a mask of disbelief. "My husband always underestimated my intelligence. He thought I was just an uptight, controlling wife who paid too much attention to details. But those details are what saved my life." The look of absolute defeat in Trevor's eyes when he realized I'd been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time was worth every sleepless night I'd spent gathering evidence. He'd planned my murder for months, but I'd planned his downfall for even longer. With Trevor behind bars and Kenny serving his sentence, I was finally free to reclaim my life. The first thing I did was sell our house. The place held too many dark memories, and I wanted a fresh start. I used the proceeds to buy a small cottage on the outskirts of Charlotte, complete with a garden where I could grow my own herbs for tea. As I tend to my herb garden now, brewing my own safe blends each morning, I often reflect on how my methodical nature, the very trait Trevor found so insufferable, became the weapon that destroyed his evil plans and secured my freedom. My story had become something of a local legend, the quality control manager who'd applied her professional skills to catch her would-be murderer. The thing about abusers I tell the women in the support group I now volunteer for is that they always underestimate their victims. They think we're too weak, too trusting, or too scared to fight back. But sometimes, the best defense is letting them defeat themselves.